Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of my Hero Priority Guide. The purpose of this guide is not to identify who is overall the best possible hero in the game or things like that. The intent behind this guide was to help newer players or players who are in the middle of their campaign, some of those early levels like 30 or 40, to help determine where they should best allocate their farming in terms of acquiring certain heroes. So when I approached this, I didn't want to try and single any one hero out as being the best hero. So when I listed the heroes, this is based off of experience, conversations with guild members, overall impressions from general chat, and just basically overall a year's worth of playing. I came up with my top 5, middle 5, and bottom 5 in terms of heroes. Now, this initial assessment was basically just my opinion. It is completely subjective. So if you personally think that Grognog is the best blue hero out there, I'm not taking away anything from you. This is just my experience with the game. So before you crucify me for saying this person's terrible or this person's not as good as you think they are, keep in mind this is all subjective. It's not based on any pure science or anything like that. So try and keep an open mind, and I would love to hear feedback at the end here. So the top 5 heroes in the blue or water category that I've personally assessed here are going to be Yorick, Yasmin, Indigo, Yoko, and Valken. And the reason being, obviously, Yorick and Yasmin have incredible epics. Those two are going to be tops of most people's list. Indigo is incredibly useful because of her energy regeneration trait. Yokozuna is high because of his overall usage through almost all of the first 2 campaigns, the normal and the challenge mode. He's a very, very good tank early on because of his versatility. He's got a daze, he has a self-heal, and he has a taunt, which pretty much no other tank can say that. And then Valken is overall just a really good and useful hero as well. So when I looked at the individual heroes, I basically jotted down a ton of data. My education background is in mathematics, so I do a ton of data analysis. I love number crunching, things like that. So anytime I can compare things, I definitely love to analyze data and look for patterns, discrepancies, things like that. So I broke this down into a bunch of different metrics. I'm going to go over a couple of the ones that I showed, or I'm going to show you a couple of the ones that I actually used in calculations, but there are a number of factors that I considered that I did not put in the video here, just because I want to keep things as simple as possible. So we're not going to get into the weighting involved or how many points a particular person earns here or there. I would love to hear feedback if you think that some of these heroes fall out of line. So definitely let me know what you think as far as the overall assessment. So again, this first assessment is just my first impression or my experience with these before any analysis is done. So looking over the water heroes, we have 15 of them that are going to be analyzed here. And when I compared the metrics, I'm assuming that they are all fully ascended. I'm not considering any of their actual their skills or their abilities. So when you have things like Igorok, who can freeze on his first attack, it's really, comparatively speaking, it's hard to compare that with Yasmin, who's a healer by trade. So I chose to omit that and basically say we're not going to consider their skills as far as who's going to be the best hero to pour your resources into. So keep that in mind in terms of usefulness. I tried to keep things as generic as possible and look at different things that I could quantify rather than an overall person's view, a subjective view of how useful somebody might be. There are obviously instances where we can quantify things as being more useful than others, and we'll get into those in a little bit here. So one of the first and primary metrics that I'm going to look at across all of the different colors is who are the epic heroes. The epic heroes already have an advantage over all of the other ones because they get passive boosts to some of their main stats, which you just flat out cannot overlook. So keep that in mind when you're going into hero farming. If a person is epic, may benefit you to put some resources to them as soon as humanly possible. Next up, Availability of tokens. So if you're in terms of priority guide, you want to be able to level heroes up. So what I did is I looked at the availability of hero tokens for all of these and listed out the top contenders in terms of who can you farm the best as far as tokens go. So these don't all have the same number of tokens, but comparatively speaking, these were the highest ones out of everybody. So it's no surprise that things like Grognog and Igorok and Ice Bloom, they're not on this list because they're hard to get their tokens. Next up is the energy cost. Energy cost is a main player when considering how useful a hero is. Anybody that's used Selwyn the Enduring before knows that he has an incredibly high energy cost. In fact, I think it's the single highest in the game, aside from Emily, who's an outlier because her revive has a cooldown of 20, which I basically disregarded. On the flip side of that, High King Valken, I gave him 2 stars because he has the single lowest energy cost out of everybody in the game, which is pretty amazing. So anytime somebody in Gen Chat basically says that Valken sucks, I like to defend him to the end of the earth because Valken does not suck at all. He's pretty amazing. And when you're running red dungeons like Lava Academy to try and farm some epics or just beat it for the first time, Valken can be a major player in that one because you can almost spam his first ability because his energy costs are so low. Next up, we're going to talk about the traits. So in general, what I've noticed over the last year or so is when a hero has more traits, they tend to be more useful. Those traits trigger passives, they have procs, things like that overall make the team better or at least make that hero better. So these are some of the heroes that actually have the most traits in the game, which will make them inherently better before any of the skills and stuff are considered. So keeping on that theme then, for those that have traits, these are heroes that have traits that directly impact every single person on the team. And that's a major factor in terms of how useful somebody is, which is why I mentioned someone before like Indigo as one of my top 5. When she crits, she generates energy for everybody. That's no joke when it comes to running boss mode or hard dungeons. So not every single hero has traits that directly impact everybody. Even somebody like Yorick, for example, none of his traits actually affect a generic team regardless of who you actually pick. But we do take this one step further and look at the number of traits that affect specific people. So there are some heroes that have specific teams that they would be able to impact. A good example would be like the Goblin team when we get to the green heroes, because the Goblin teams will buff each other, but they really don't work well with anybody else. Cruel King Bramble is not going to help a fire hero on your team. And the same thing goes kind of here with Yorick. Yorick works well with undead, but he does not work well with just everybody in general. So where does that leave us? After running the actual calculations and spitting out the records, here's what I got as far as what the computer said is the highest priority heroes that you should pursue. It's not a surprise that Yasmin is in the top 2. The way that I broke this down is any of the little groupings you see, these people tied with their overall score, so I lumped them together. So Ice Pick being higher than Therend is not really a good indication. They tied for the same score. So Yasmin is tied for the best blue hero priority-wise. Remember, she's not the best blue hero per se, but in terms of usefulness and the priority that you should put into her, the computer thinks that she is the best one out there. A little bit surprising, in my opinion, was Yorick. He fell down to basically tied for 3rd or tied for 4th, if you want to consider it that way, which isn't bad. I mean, we have 15 to compare. Somebody had to be top 1 and top 2. The one that I found most surprising was actually Sir William, and it was really only surprising to me because I didn't use William a lot during my campaign or even challenge mode. But being that the computer thinks that he's quite a bit better, it might be that for you people that are level 10, 20, or maybe even 30, and you've already invested in him a little bit, he might be one of your go-to tanks for early on. Now, personally, I don't use him in endgame content that much, but after seeing this, hopefully some people can determine if they want to invest in him a little bit more. A little bit underwhelming would be people like Indigo. Indigo is in my top 5, and if we're looking at this comparatively speaking, after we break the ties, she is 2, 4, 6, 7. She's tied for 8th, it looks like, which is okay. But I think Indigo has a lot of really useful abilities. She can silence. She generates energy. She can slow people. I mean, these are things that you know, definitely make a difference in hard dungeons. Igorok was quite a bit underwhelming. He fell down all the way down into the bottom 4. Largely, this was because of his high energy cost. It just makes him less useful in a long dungeon, or rather in a short dungeon. Long dungeon, at least he can use his abilities more than once. But sometimes that high energy cost could be a real killer. What shouldn't be surprising to most people is Samurai Takume and Selwyn the Enduring are at the bottom of the barrel. Those two guys are routinely in my top 5 worst heroes in the entire game list, so it's no surprising that they round out the bottom of this one here. So what I'm looking for at this point here is actually some feedback on where you think these fall. Do you think that Grognog is the best blue hero out there? You should try and go after him right away. He should be top 2, for example, things like that. And keep in mind, this isn't necessarily a guide that says this is the best blue hero. You can't really compare them like that because everybody is so different. And you'll see that in Gen Chat all the time. Two different heroes, you can't really compare one as being better than the other. But we can compare the priority in terms of who you should be investing your time in, and that's what this is going to help you with. So give me some feedback. Let me know if there's any other metrics out there that you think would be a good feature or attribute to consider, and then I will rework some of my numbers for some of the other elements, and we'll see how those shake out. I would also like to get some feedback in terms of what you guys think is a good starting benchmark for the other ones as well, because I obviously have my top 5 purple heroes, but I would like to know what yours are so that I could compare them, and then we could also spit out the numbers and see how those actually fall. So give me some feedback, suggestions, things like that, and after I absorb all that, I'll throw some new numbers into the calculations, and we'll release the next element soon. So if you have a preference on which one comes next, just leave those in the comments, and I will release that one, hopefully within a couple of days, probably by the end of this weekend. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.